tragic situation, and I just thought it was, it had to be told. And nobody else was telling it. And the script had been around for a while, and it was a good story. So.
At 95, Clint Eastwood is more than a man. He's a living monument to endurance. For over 7 decades, his face has been the embodiment of grit, justice, and quiet resilience. But behind the legend is a life carved by loneliness, betrayal, and the weight of choices that could never be undone. Now, in the stillness of his final years, the battles are no longer fought with bullets or box office numbers, but with memory, regret, and the unrelenting march of time. This is not Clint Eastwood Hollywood scripted. This is the man who stood tall when everything else crumbled away. Clint Eastwood has outlasted the very world that made him. The dusty showdowns, the outlaw code, the stoic stare, those belong to another era, and yet he remains unchanged in essence. Born in 1930, he has lived through 9 decades of transformation, from the crackle of radio broadcasts to the hum of streaming platforms. His career isn't a list of films, it's a timeline of survival. He has adapted without ever surrendering his identity. At 95, he moves more slowly, speaks more softly, but the watchfulness in his eyes is unshaken. He has endured Hollywood's reinventions, personal heartbreaks, and shifting cultural tides. To audiences, he is a symbol of strength. To himself, he's simply the man who never stepped aside. He doesn't dwell on the fading of the genre that made him famous, nor the rivals long gone. Instead, he carries the weight of every role, every loss, and every silent victory with the same unspoken defiance that once silenced saloons on screen. Age hasn't erased the cowboy, it's distilled him, leaving only the essence of resilience. The man who would become a Hollywood titan began in the instability of the Great Depression. Born in San Francisco, Clint's early years were marked by constant movement, his family uprooting to chase work his father could never hold for long. By age 10, he had lived in more than a dozen towns across the West Coast. These weren't just relocations, they were displacements, each one teaching him that nothing stayed and no one was guaranteed to remain. School was a blur, discipline often harsh, and stability a concept he could only imagine. What rooted him wasn't a person, but music. At 12, he began teaching himself piano, practicing until his fingers ached, refusing to stop until the keys stopped hurting. This discipline wasn't about talent, it was survival, a way to anchor himself in a world constantly shifting under his feet. By his teens, Clint understood that love was conditional, security was fleeting, and self-reliance was the only reliable currency. The boy moving from one unfamiliar school to another would one day channel that isolation into characters who spoke little but said everything in their silence. The foundation for Hollywood's greatest cowboy was not built on open plains, but on cold, borrowed rooms. In 1951, at just 21, Clint's life was rewritten in cold salt water. Serving as a swimming instructor in the U.S. Army at Fort Ord, he boarded a military plane for a weekend trip to Seattle. Mid-flight, disaster struck, the engines failed, forcing an emergency landing off the rugged coast of Point Reyes. There were no life vests, no calm instructions, only chaos and freezing Pacific waves. Clint swam for miles, muscles screaming, lungs burning, the icy water stealing his breath with every stroke. The shoreline was a mirage that refused to come closer, yet he pressed on, driven not by hope, but by a refusal to surrender. When he finally collapsed onto the beach, shivering and exhausted, something inside him had shifted. That night, wrapped in silence, he realized life could vanish in a heartbeat. From then on, He cut waste from his days, worked with relentless focus, and moved toward his goals as if every moment was borrowed. On set, it became his signature: quick shoots, minimal takes, precision over excess. To outsiders, it looked like discipline. To Clint, it was survival instinct. The man who had faced down the ocean carried that urgency for the rest of his life, both behind the camera and in it. Hollywood was never built for someone like Clint Eastwood. When he arrived, the industry was a maze of charm, politics, and social maneuvering, and he wasn't playing that game. Casting directors called him too stiff, too quiet, too unremarkable. He landed roles so small his name didn't appear in the credits, but instead of fading away, he studied. He learned to let stillness work for him, to make silence magnetic. His first real break came with Rawhide in 1959, a role meant as background but soon stealing focus from the show's lead. The quiet intensity that casting directors once dismissed became his trademark. Yet global stardom didn't arrive until Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy. Ironically, Clint almost turned down the role. Too little dialogue, he thought. But the script's silence mirrored his own life, and he took it. That nameless drifter became a cultural phenomenon, reshaping the Western genre. Clint wasn't trying to charm the audience, he was drawing them in by making them lean closer. In an industry obsessed with noise, he made stillness a weapon. It wasn't performance, it was autobiography. The man on screen wasn't an invention, it was Clint, distilled, his quiet defiance speaking louder than any line ever could. By the early 1970s, Clint Eastwood had conquered Hollywood, but on someone else's terms. Studios kept him boxed into the same stoic persona, ignoring the deeper stories he wanted to tell. Directors micromanaged his performances, stripping away the authenticity he valued most. He didn't crave awards or prestige, he craved control. In 1971, he stepped behind the camera with Play Misty for Me, a risky psychological thriller that reflected his own battles with emotional chaos. It was raw, personal, and the beginning of his true voice as a filmmaker. Over the decades, that voice grew sharper, culminating in Unforgiven, a Western stripped of glamour, drenched in regret. The Oscars followed, but the gold statues meant less than the freedom they represented. Films like $1 Million Baby and Gran Torino became cinematic confessions, stories of flawed, burdened men who found redemption in unexpected places. Clint's directing style was lean, instinctive, often silent on set, mirroring his own nature. For him, filmmaking wasn't about crafting a fantasy. It was about telling truths too raw for conversation. In stepping behind the camera, he wasn't just escaping typecasting. He was reclaiming his life. And once he took that control, he never let anyone else hold it again. Maggie Johnson was the woman who believed in Clint before Hollywood did. They met in the 1950s when he was a struggling actor and she was the steady hand in a life full of uncertainty. She stood by him through lean years and rejection, raising their children while his career grew. But fame brought distance, and distance bred betrayal. Affairs became frequent. Children were born outside the marriage, and the home Maggie had built turned into a quiet place of absence. Their marriage ended in 1984, not in scandal, but in sorrow. 3 decades dissolved into a settlement and silence. Sandra Locke entered his life next, bringing passion and volatility in equal measure. Their 14-year relationship began as creative partnership, but devolved into control, heartbreak, and bitter legal battles. Later, Christina Sandera brought him peace in his twilight years, offering stability without demands. Her sudden death in 2024 left him more alone than ever. Through it all, love in Clint's life seemed to have an expiration date. Each relationship shaped him. Each ending left a mark. The man who played devoted lovers on screen often found himself, in reality, watching love walk away and never finding the right words to make it stay. Sandra Locke was unlike anyone Clint had known. They met on the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1975, and what followed was a relationship that burned fiercely and destructively for 14 years. On screen, they were magnetic. Off screen, their lives became entangled in ways that would scar them both. Sandra claimed Clint controlled her career, limiting roles and ultimately sabotaging opportunities. 2 abortions during their time together, reportedly under his influence, left deep emotional wounds. When Clint moved another woman into the home they had shared, the betrayal was complete. Their breakup spiraled into a public legal war, with Sandra suing for palimony and alleging career sabotage. They settled out of court, but the bitterness lingered. When Sandra died in 2018, Clint made no public statement, sent no flowers. Friends insist her death shook him more than he let on. She had seen him in his rawest, most unguarded moments, and now she was gone, taking any chance for reconciliation with her. The silence he kept after her passing wasn't indifference. It was the weight of regret, the unspoken truth that some wounds don't close, even with time. In losing Sandra, Clint lost more than a partner. He lost the mirror that had once reflected his truest self. Christina Sandera entered Clint's life quietly, without the chaos of red carpets or studio lights. They met at his Mission Ranch Hotel, where she worked as a hostess. By 2014, she had moved into his home, bringing with her a calm unlike anything he had known. She wasn't drawn to the legend, she loved the man. For nearly a decade, she became his anchor, her presence steady through the uncertainties of aging. They shared simple routines, walks, music, evenings without pretense. Then, in July 2024, she died suddenly at 61, leaving Clint shattered. Her passing was met with a single public statement from him. "Christina was a lovely, caring woman, and I will miss her very much." Neighbors noticed the change almost instantly. The blinds stayed drawn, the piano untouched, the house hushed in a way that felt permanent. At her small private service, Clint stood apart, unshaven, eyes clouded, resting his hand on her urn longer than anyone else. Those close to him say her absence marked the true beginning of his solitude. She was the one person who had seen him as neither a star nor a legend, just a man. Without her, the silence in his life became absolute. Clint Eastwood's children form a patchwork of timelines, relationships, and emotional distances. At least 8, with 6 different mothers, their stories are as varied as his films. Some, like Scott and Kyle, have stepped into the public eye, carrying pieces of their father's legacy. Others remained private for years, some only learning their true parentage in adulthood. Clint has never been one for open displays of fatherly affection, and many of his children describe him as distant, present in moments, absent in others. Birthdays were missed, milestones passed quietly. There's no public bitterness, but there is complexity. The man who played strong, principled fathers on screen often struggled to bring that same role into real life. With some, he's rebuilt connections over time, appearing at events or family gatherings. With others, the gap remains. His approach to fatherhood reflects the same guarded nature he's carried all his life, measured, careful, and often silent. Yet those who know him say there's an unspoken pride when he speaks of them, however briefly. If love is a language, Clint's has always been subtle, sometimes too subtle to bridge the distance. In the end, His children's stories are part of his legacy, complicated, imperfect, but undeniably his. At 95, Clint Eastwood lives largely in the stillness of Carmel by the sea. Mission Ranch remains his sanctuary, its sweeping fields and ocean views a daily reminder of preservation over excess. His routines are simple: golf, meditation, tending the grounds. Yet every corner of the property carries echoes: Christina's laughter, Sandra's shadow, Maggie's quiet goodbyes, the children's rare visits. He no longer seeks the spotlight, granting few interviews, his words deliberate when he does. Physically slower, mentally sharp, he continues to work when inspiration calls. His films are fewer now, but each feels like a parting message. In these final years, Clint's story isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. He is living proof that strength is not the absence of pain, but the choice to keep standing in its aftermath. The man who once defined toughness for generations now shows that endurance can be quiet, even gentle. His life has been a storm of contradictions, triumph and failure, loyalty and betrayal, connection and solitude. And yet, through it all, he remains unbroken. Clint Eastwood's legacy is not just in the films he made, but in the truth he lived, that even legends are human, and even the toughest cowboys eventually ride into the sunset alone.